welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. This is a show that gives us an opportunity to examine the many clues that exist about the fact that humanity is preparing to ascend to a higher plane of consciousness and a higher plane of existence. Since the show began, we've been looking at a wide variety of examples of the evidence out there that appears to connect to the concept of ascension, human ascension. Everything from the many clues given by ancient philosophers, the spiritual writings of our ancestors, biblical scholars and folklore, even spreading our inquiry out to look at supernatural phenomena, astrology, hypnosis, the experiencer phenomena as well, UFOs and extraterrestrials, psychology, and scientific discoveries. What our exploration has shown us so far is that human ascension and our transformation into the new kind of lighter and more enlightened reality, well, it's perceived by different people to be occurring in vastly different ways. But what most people, regardless of their belief system, seem to agree is that humanity, or at least most of us, are destined to ascend. And quite soon, because it seems that things are starting to hot up around here. And the point of time where an ascension occurs is believed to be very soon and almost within reach right now. It's kind of exciting. Whether you consider it to be a transition into the age of Aquarius or a deliverance by God through the end of times, as described by the Bible's New Testament, or even a cosmic intervention as predicted by the growing number of self-confessed UFO or extraterrestrial experiences, we all seem to feel something coming, something that causes us to question the status quo. Many of us just feel that little bit more aware of what's going on around us, along with having a slight sense of unease, perhaps, as though something completely out of our realm of understanding is waiting for us just around the next corner, or maybe even the corner after that. But not too far away. The ascension of humanity is inevitable, but what exactly is it? And what are the steps towards achieving it? And is there anyone out there who will not ascend? Oh, gosh. Or perhaps is there someone out there who's trying to prevent our ascension from taking place at all? These are all topics that I'm trying to be able to research for this show. Anyway, today's episode is going to be a search for answers, just like that, just like all the other episodes, perhaps even an attempt to find a roadmap to ascension today, I think, so that we can possibly move things along a little bit, or at the very least recognize the signs that seem confusing to many of us right now. But actually, they make perfect sense once they're placed into the context of human ascension. There is no fixed number of steps towards human ascension. I've done quite a lot of research on this, and some people say that there are 5 steps, others say 10 or 12 steps. Some people say even more than that. I've tried to search around to see what's out there, and really it's all very speculative, but only kind of, because regardless of your belief or your perception, there are certain clues that demonstrate that a path towards ascension does exist, regardless of how you see it as an individual. There are components that seem to be across the board regardless. So today I'm going to try and find a path, something that seems to help us to understand what's happening around us. Because something is happening, and the better we understand it, the more likely we are to be able to take our first baby step onto the path towards ascension as an individual. They say that ascension is like an old-fashioned set of scales, the kind of scales that you'd see whenever you think of the scales of justice or even the justice card in tarot. But, even at the 1950s butcher shop, perhaps, something weighty is placed on each side of the scales. And if you keep adding more to one side, then the scales will tip towards that heavier side. The way it works when it comes to ascension, though, is that every individual who lives in the world has opportunities to modify themselves, either deliberately and consciously, or because of the circumstances that they're subjected to. And as they modify in accordance with, say, a raising of their consciousness and the alignment of their thoughts desires, and actions, they begin to transform into the kind of individual who's more conducive to ascension. And so they, metaphorically speaking, shift from the old side of the scale to the new side of the scale. As they do that, one by one, eventually the new side of the scale, the side that allows for humans to begin to ascend into a higher and more enlightened new reality, well, it gets more and more populated with individuals who are ready to ascend. They have shifted their conscious perspective, adapted their bodies and their minds to coincide with that shift in perspective. And so they might even begin to vibrate at a level that is ready to ascend, kind of jumping out of its skin almost. Eventually, as this continues to occur, the scales on the new side, on the side of ascension, will begin to tip into the new reality, metaphorically speaking. Of course, not everyone will be ready. And I've often wondered about what will happen to those people. But that's something I'm going to look at I'll try and learn more about that for a future episode. For now, let's focus on what happens when an individual does begin the process of becoming ready for ascension. So I think today we're going to look at this as a kind of a roadmap with various steps, but loose steps in a way. But first, we have to make sure that we're able to establish what the term ascension of humanity actually really is all about. At the moment, the reality of humanity here on Earth is that we live in a three-dimensional existence in which the only things that appear to exist are things that we can see and hear and touch and taste and smell. According to neuroscience, there are actually 5 additional senses that we have here in 3D reality, which include our sense of balance, the awareness of our body position and movement, the ability to sense temperature and the perception of pain, and an awareness of the passage of time. Like, for example, when your alarm clock has been set for 6 a.m., but you wake up a few minutes before the alarm goes off because you just sense that it's the right time. This is something I'm actually very aware of myself. The alarm on my phone is permanently set to wake me up at 6 a.m. 6 days a week. But I've hardly ever heard the alarm go off because every morning I seem to wake up just a couple of minutes before it, 5:58 a.m., 5:56 a.m., that kind of thing. Now, there's also the concept of a sixth sense that is not universally accepted by science, which involves intuitive awareness. I don't know why it's still being referred to as the sixth sense if there are 10 that scientists have already acknowledged. Maybe we should start calling it the 11th sense. To be honest, I don't know how many senses there really are, but I'm sure that there are far more that exist out there than we've even discovered. 20, 30, who knows? Anyway, the 3D reality involves those 10 senses plus that sixth sense, which is the one of intuition or intuitive insight for those who are believers like me. Anywho, the 3D reality that we live in is physical by nature. And it's characterized by a material existence, a linear passage of time, and a focus on the human ego and our individual experiences as we pass through our lifetimes. Human ascension is the process of evolving or shifting the collective human consciousness to a higher dimension. And people are talking about the 5th dimension, or otherwise called 5D. It's a curious thing that most people interested in the concept of raising our consciousness or transitioning into a 5th dimensional reality tend to skip over the obviously left out 4th dimensional reality. And I sometimes wonder if one of the reasons why everything in the world is so fraught and tense is because we aren't really in 3D reality anymore anyway, at least not like we used to be. We might actually already be in 4D reality, which is a kind of a transitional reality in some way, while we accumulate enough people in 4D to finally tip the scales towards the 5th dimension. So let me explain a little, because I think that once we get to know all about the steps of transforming from a 3D level of consciousness to a 5D level of consciousness, it becomes a bit more obvious that we may no longer even have both feet inside this 3D reality anymore. So I've described 3D reality, and that's pretty easy to understand because we all know what it feels like to live in a material world with all of its senses and time spans and individualized kind of experiences. But in recent years, as humanity has progressed with technology and has become more global and more aware of all of the complications of being human, there has been what feels to many people to be a sort of shift in the energy around us. People are starting to question their reality, their and experience spiritual awakening and begin to understand concepts like interconnectedness and higher consciousness. For quite a while now, even perhaps 100 years or so, there's been a growing sense of unease and confusion in the world as well. There's also a weird sense of interconnectedness that feels like it's mingled together with disconnectedness. Have you ever felt that? Like you're part of something that's connected but also disconnected at the same time? It's like we aren't separate, but we aren't together. That's how it feels. And more people than ever, even they feel as if they don't quite fit into the world in the way that they should, like a door hinge on a kitchen cabinet that might need adjustment or something. You know, you can still open and close the door just fine, but when you step back and take a look at the kitchen, the doors look a bit lopsided and crooked compared to other ones, for example. So many people feel, that way at the moment. And I think it might be because feeling this way also happens to be the very first step in human ascension. Yes, it's true. The very first thing that happens when you begin to ascend to a higher dimension is that you begin to feel slightly at odds with your current dimension. Specifically, you begin to experience an awakening of the mind. The purpose of your mind awakening is to allow it to begin to open towards greater possibilities of knowledge than what has constrained you inside this 3D existence that you've been living in. Because without the awakening of the mind, a person can't begin to consciously function in a new environment, even if the environment is changing gradually around them. I'm really glad that the awakening of the mind is the very first step. And there's two reasons for that. The first is that it helps us to understand the chaos and the conflict that's happening around us at the moment. It just seems like nobody agrees on anything anymore, doesn't it? It does. It really does. And also, it feels like people seem to, I don't know, people seem to know things that they think are true that the rest of us are pretty sure aren't true. Like, for example, the whole concept of what being a normal person means. Some people believe that being normal is one thing and others believe it completely differently. Like, let's just say you think normal is when you live by a traditional male and female prescribed standard. The man is the protector and the provider who brings material prosperity to the home, and the woman is the nurturer, the one who nourishes the family and provides emotional support. The man marries the woman, they have 2.3 children, they rescue a Labrador from somewhere, and they live happily ever after with weekly church visits and monthly dinner parties with other normal couples. That's normal, yeah? Other people believe that normal is when you get to live as you feel is natural for you, whether it be as a single person, a childless cat lady, perhaps, or married to someone of the opposite sex, or maybe even to someone of the same sex. You follow the faith or spiritual belief that appeals to you most, or you don't, if you don't feel that way at all. And you might even dabble in a few of the spiritual arts, or feel quite certain that you're being visited in your sleep by entities from another world. Or maybe you suspect that you're actually that entity from another world. These days, normal doesn't really mean much other than to say that you somehow feel connected to a larger group of people who appear to be similar to you in their way of life and belief system and values. So the second reason why I'm glad that awakening of the mind is the very first step is because it makes a lot of sense in light of how certain powerful people and groups seem to want to keep us from awakening our minds. Like, what's the whole deal with, book banning, for example, except perhaps as an effort to try and prevent people from reading books that might give them a greater sense of awareness. of something that's new to them, kind of like an awakening of the mind. This reminds me of a movie that I watched recently. It actually wasn't a very good movie. Sorry, it really wasn't. Not in my view, anyway. And there was way too much throwing up in it, which really, really, I really don't like that. I mean, I don't know what the deal is these days with so mmany movies wanting to include throwing up scenes. It just puts me off the movie straight away. I don't understand the appeal. Don't they realize that, a lot of people are eating dinner or something or eating a snack while they're watching these movies? It's just very off putting. But anyway, I'm digressing, way off topic. The movie that I saw was called Blockers, and it was probably a B grade movie, I'd say, about a few parents who got into a panic because they found out that their daughters were planning to have sex for the first time with their boyfriends after the prom. As you can imagine, this sent the parents off on a mad dash to stop it from actually happening. Interestingly, though, only one of the girls did have sex with her boyfriend that night. And it turns out her boyfriend loved her and she loved him. And of course, it was sort of portrayed to be a positive thing. And the mother had a chance to stop them. But when she saw how they felt about each other and how happy her daughter was in the moment, she decided to leave them to it and to not try and stop them from having sex. She admitted to herself that her daughter was 18 and was going to have sex with somebody eventually, and so why not this fellow who loved her that she loved, and why not now? Especially because it seemed as though the feelings that they had for each other were mutual. Yes, in reality, her daughter might have gotten hurt by the experience, either dumped or abandoned, been left with a child and abandoned, for example. Maybe she'd given up the plan of college one day and she'd marry this guy and not reach her potential or the potential that was hers or meant to be hers before she'd had sex with him. But, those kinds of things happen to everyone one way or another. We all end up looking back on life at some point and wondering, what if? What if I'd not gotten married so young? What if I'd finished college? What if I'd worked harder or taken more risks or turned my hobby into my career? What if I had put myself first all these years? All of the what ifs, there's so many of them and they're infinite. And the movie was just a small example of how trying to stop someone from doing, seeing, or knowing something really only just delays the inevitable. And delay doesn't automatically mean that it will turn out better. I actually believe that the universe always comes back around to sweep up anything that you've tried to delay. The universe always gets its way eventually, and the universe always wins. So why did I end up talking about regrets and what ifs and the many ways that people try to stop us from knowing something that's probably inevitable anyway? Well, the answer to that is knowledge. And that's the key reason why I think the earliest part of human ascension is the awakening of the mind. Because awakening the mind through experiences or reading or learning or whatever gives us a greater capacity to receive and retain knowledge. So at this point, I'm going to go biblical. Have you noticed that somehow everything in this show links to the Bible or some other religious scripture? Well, yes, it does. And there is a good reason for that. And that is because whether it's the Torah or the Zohar even, the Quran or the Bible, or even the Gnostic texts like the books of Enoch or Judas or something like that, there's always a battle taking place between the human three-dimensional existence here on Earth and the acquisition of knowledge. And it goes back to the very first thing that happened to the very first people we know. And we're talking about Adam and Eve. Because this is, obviously, a show about humanity. The book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, talks about how God told Adam to take care of the Garden of Eden and that he was allowed to eat from any tree except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God said that if either Adam or Eve did eat from the tree of knowledge, they would surely die. A nearby serpent ended up chatting with Eve, and during the conversation, the serpent told her that this actually wasn't true. They wouldn't die just from eating from the tree of knowledge. And so they did. They ate from the tree of knowledge, which of course was a big no-no. And to punish them, God cut their lifespan down to around what it is for people today. And he cursed both Adam and Eve with hardships that would be suffered by all of humanity throughout its existence on Earth. That's a bit extreme, really, really harsh, don't you think? But I'm hoping to cover this actual story of Adam and Eve in more detail in the future because there's so much more to it. For now, let's just ask the question of why. As a very first measure against the humans on Earth, why was it that, the humans that he placed here, why did God try to stop us from gaining knowledge? And is this a clue about why we're here in our three-dimensional reality? Were Adam and Eve originally created to be one-dimensional or two-dimensional humans? So, for example, a one-dimensional entity has no width or depth and is simply a length that cannot be perceived by people that are here today. And a two-dimensional entity is generally referred to as something like a square or a triangle with angles but no depth. But I like to think of two-dimensional entities as being like something you see in a silent movie or, on TV with the sound turned off. You can watch the two-dimensional entities all day long on television. It's quite easy to become convinced that they're real. But as soon as you attempt to reach them or interact with them directly, they disappear. So if you were to get inside the television and try to be with the two-dimensional entities, they wouldn't be there. They only appear on the surface, but beyond the facade of the television screen, there's nothing. A bit like a holographic image. Now that's interesting, and that's the reason why I bring it up, because people have been seeing things across the world that are sometimes believed to be holographic in nature. There are some extraterrestrial encounters up in the sky, whether it be an angelic presence or a UFO craft that might be solid and tangible, or might be a type of projection created by a faraway presence beyond the scope of our 3D existence. It doesn't even matter. Maybe that's what we were supposed to be. And when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they gained just enough knowledge to ascend beyond a first or second dimensional existence and into a three-dimensional reality. Or maybe it was the other way round. Maybe they were meant to be five-dimensional beings, but were held back as a punishment by God. And maybe that knowledge was taken away from them, which is why we don't officially know. I just think that it's uncanny that knowledge is the first step towards ascension, when the first action towards humanity was the suppression of knowledge. It's a funny little coincidence, don't you think? So with this first step, the opening up of a greater awareness can bring a variety of symptoms, and many of those symptoms leave a person feeling confused, disorientated, uncertain of what's happening around them, or with this weird nagging feeling that everything is not as it appears to be on the surface. So suddenly, all of the suspicion and skepticism that we see around us, it starts to take on a logical kind of explanation. There are many people out there who don't trust the world order. They're suspicious of leaders, of the way things are done in the world. They feel as though religion and faith is just a way to hide the truth from us, or that television and the internet were invented to keep us distracted from what's really going on around us. There's actually a woman on YouTube who explains the process of her awakening of the mind really well. I'm not saying whether she's right or wrong, but I like how she describes her own experiences. Her name is Christy Burke, and her YouTube channel is called Jezebel Vibes. And I believe she named her channel after some name calling and finger pointing that had been done towards her as a result of her awakening. Christy used to be a devout evangelical Christian. She grew up in the church and it was all she knew. She was a true believer and she spent her time living the missionary lifestyle of trying to teach the word of God to others and bring them into the faith. But then she came across a few verses in the Bible that she didn't quite understand. She just didn't get it. The more she asked questions, the more she felt as though she wasn't getting any answers that helped her to complete that circle and make sense of the verses. It was this that caused a spark of awareness in her that gradually grew into a skepticism and then eventually into a deconstruction of her Christian beliefs. She now spends her time offering support to people who are leaving Christianity and explaining to the world on her YouTube channel the various parts of the Bible that she no longer is convinced by. Now, this is her perspective, but what I like is her story. I wouldn't be able to tell you for sure if Christy has been experiencing an awakening of the mind that brings her closer to ascension, but the way that she describes her experiences, it seems as though perhaps she is in her own way. So that first step is about awakening the mind. And with an awakening, gradually everything you mindlessly had been accepting as normal in your life might come into question. You might feel a growing frustration or an anger or sadness. You might experience a sense of having lost your identity. You might start to have trouble concentrating, or you may feel unusual aches and pains that seem to have no reason to be there. And you may start to experience strange dreams that leave you wondering what is really happening when you sleep. Often, during this early stage of awakening the mind, you begin to question your purpose in life. This can be a very risky time for a person. It makes me wonder about people who appear to have gone off the rails a bit, like let's talk about some extremes, like, someone who ends up on the roof with an AR-15 shooting innocent people, or someone who falls into such a state of hopelessness that they consider taking their own life, or maybe even act out on those feelings and do take their own life. Or maybe someone who has always been a pretty happy-go-lucky person, but then seems to have become this radicalized, weird, angry, militant type of personality who doesn't trust anyone or anything and finds conspiracies around every corner. It's almost as though the person has experienced malfunction of some kind. And although I don't want to simplify what I'm certain is very complex, a very complex experience for that person or their family or the people that they affect with this state of mind, I do wonder if the increase in the number of people who appear to malfunction in some way these days, kind of, in really extreme ways like this, I wonder if it's a symptom of a shift in consciousness that they're having trouble coping with. Because, think of it this way. It's like a loss of innocence. When you begin to awaken the mind, there's no going back. You can't unawaken yourself. And if you can't find a way forward and you've become awakened, then what do you end up with? Apart from this state of sort of perplexed confusion. So take, for example, the young couple who've grown up together since they were small children. They're best friends as kids and they begin dating as teenagers, and they're in deep, deep love with each other, and they get married really young and start a family really young, and it's like a fairy tale. They're soulmates who know nothing but each other and the life that they were meant to have together forever. And there is a strong bond of trust between them that seems unbreakable. They're destined to be together and in love until the day that they both die. And then one day, one of them, let's just say it's the wife, for example, well, what happens if one day she goes out with her girlfriends, has a few too many drinks, and makes a stupid decision to sleep with that fellow who runs the local gym because he's always flirting with her, and she's experiencing a moment of weakness or selfishness, or who knows. Maybe she's had a tough day. Maybe she's fed up with her husband's, forgetting her birthday or something. Or maybe the kids have just been driving her crazy all week. Or maybe she's just curious about what being with someone else would be like. And so she has a brief fling, but the word gets out and her husband finds out. Or maybe she even tells him because the guilt is just too much to bear. Either way, once the husband knows about the fling, even if they've been otherwise the perfect couple since the day they were children, and this is the only indiscretion between them, it will never, ever be the same because that element of innocence is lost. The mind was instantly awakened to the fact that even a loving wife who you've known since childhood, loved since you were a teenager, well, she might not be what you always took for granted that she would always be, forever and ever. Once your mind is awake, there's no going back. And if you can't see the way forward, then perhaps it creates a no-win kind of situation that explains why so many people these days, they just seem to fall right off the rails. This might actually be one of the explanations of what happens to people who don't ascend along with the rest of humanity. I don't know. It might be. It might not be. But it sure does sound like it might be. But for those who are destined to reach a higher state of consciousness, they will experience this early period of unease, which will lead them to the next step towards ascension. And that is the step that I guess can be summed up as a cleansing of some kind. So, cleansing is part of a bigger step, actually, but cleansing can include lots of different types of things. The overall concept, though, is that a person will be taking steps to eliminate or reduce the toxins or barriers in their environment that have been holding them back. This could be anything or everything. I mean, stepping away from certain friends or family members, leaving a job, working through negative emotions, or spending more time outdoors and reconnecting with nature. They're all examples. The person might become more aware of the importance of eating clean, natural foods and less sugary or processed foods. But the cleansing step is actually a part of another step or phase of awakening, which is the awakening of the new personality. Now, personality awakening is sometimes called personality ascension, but it's not really an ascension yet. It's an awakening. It's the step during which an individual begins to develop their true self. And it's basically broken up into two different parts. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on, I'm already my true self, right? But are you really? Are you? Are you really your true self? Let me use my own life as an example, because the thing is about when it comes to personality awakening, it's different for every person. And so it really does depend on your personal circumstances. It might be a quick process that takes a year or so. It might be a very long process that takes a lifetime. And it may happen more than once. Your personality may evolve over time. In my case, I can pinpoint the various times in my life so far that my personality has shifted into what I look back on as being a kind of awakening that brought me to where I am today so far. Because who knows, there's probably more awakening ready for me in the future. So when I was a young child, for example, I was really shy. I was a very shy, sensitive little girl who got her feelings hurt very easily. I was often afraid to speak on my own behalf, so I often internalized my feelings and didn't even share them with other people at all, including my family. I think if I'd been raised in a volatile or an unstable family environment, this would have made me quite a vulnerable young person because I wouldn't have been able to reach out for help or advice if I was met with major challenges. Fortunately for me, and I am really lucky in this regard, I think, my home life was quite stable. And so I was well protected, maybe too well protected sometimes. And so it took me a while to experience some of the world's harsher lessons. I developed a very quietly trusting, simple outlook on life that was based on having had a safe and stable upbringing in a reasonably well-off middle-class home with two parents who had taken on generally traditional roles. My dad was the primary breadwinner. My mother sometimes worked with him, but in support roles, and generally she worked part-time. She was primarily the homemaker, and most of my younger years involved me being surrounded by immediate family, close neighbors, schoolmates, or relatives, like grandparents, cousins, uncles, and aunts, hardly any of which I actually have in my life now, which is sort of strange, isn't it? I went to school, I played sports, I watched TV, and I played with neighborhood kids my own age in a very average suburban neighborhood. So I don't know, I guess you could be normal if that's your kind of normal. My personality developed on the basis of my innocence, my shyness, the protective bubble that I'd been raised in, and my personality was contained by the limited view of the world that I'd been exposed to. As it happens, I managed to move overseas to the United States in my 20s. I went to university, first in California, then in Georgia. I lived far away from family, And I was surrounded by a new country, a new group of friends, new experiences, and also the college or university experience, which is really all about opening the mind and teaching you, to think critically. Well, it all had collectively a profound impact on me. One thing I will definitely say, if you're a parent who's wondering about how to raise your children so that they grow up to have a really awakened mind and a real awareness of the world and how it really is rather than what you believe it to be from inside your family bubble, well, that best way to do it really is to let your children travel the world or to be educated overseas. It was a phenomenal eye opener for me, and I think it would be that way for any young person. After quite a few years overseas, I returned to Australia for a short time and I just didn't recognize it. But that's not because Australia had changed. Yes, it had advanced technologically, the cities were bigger and busier, the population had evolved and become more ethnically diverse. Things like that had definitely happened. But all in all, Australia hadn't been the thing that had changed. I was the thing that had changed. I had changed dramatically. Living overseas and going to college, holding down a job, buying a car, renting an apartment, making new friends, paying the bills, learning the train system, watching the local news, learning and adopting a new lifestyle. Well, it all adds up to make you an entirely different person. For example, I wasn't accustomed to having to negotiate for whatever outcomes I wanted when I had been safely tucked away in my early Australian life. If things got too hard, I could have just asked mum and dad to help, or I'd hide away, or I'd, think I was being bullied or something, or I'd think life was unfair. When I moved overseas and had to take care of myself, I gradually realized that everyone has to take care of themselves. And so if they want to get something or do something or achieve something, if they want something, they have to step in and make it happen. They have to learn how to negotiate with other people. They need to know when to say no. They need to avoid becoming a doormat for people who are smarter and perhaps a bit opportunistic. I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet while I was living in the US, which was a pretty mean feat for someone who was very shy when they went. And I was able to see America as an outside observer would see America. But I also began to see Australia as an outside observer would see Australia as well. My personality became stronger, where I began to learn about what really makes me happy, or what I like and what I don't like, the kinds of people I should let into my life, and the ones I should politely stay as far away from as possible. But I still wasn't my true self, because I was still having to conform to a life, that I needed to live by in order to get by. So I did a lot of office work, every minute of which I hated, and some of the personalities in my job, they kind of rubbed off on me as time went on because I had to adapt myself for those jobs, and which gradually became my career, things like that. However, what I did learn in the process was the cleansing bit. Later, when I moved to the UK, I learned it in other ways. I learned to cleanse myself of unwanted baggage because after traveling a lot, I discovered that unwanted baggage was likely to hold me back. So, toxic relationships, cluttered houses, chaotic lifestyles, chaotic people. I realized I wasn't happy with that kind of environment around me. So, gradually, I got rid of all of that. And that began to fine tune my personality even further. I eventually became a quietly confident, strong person who can really focus on things to make them possible. I never get swept up in distractions for very long because I've learned that if I continuously distract myself and I'm the person I have to rely on, I'll never get anything done in my life. So I'm focused, and I'm also the kind of person who will reduce the things in my life to just what I need or what I find useful or what I can learn from or what enhances my life and my living experience. And I tend to release anything that's holding me back. Of course, it's all a process, so there's always more to learn and more to develop, but that's my story. And I bet that you also have a story of how your personality has developed over time, because that's all part of our awakening as humans. I guess it might even be the whole reason why we're here, to grow and awaken in the way that's right for us. Actually, I think I'm still on that cleansing path of personality awakening anyway. Right now, as we speak, I recently began a new, healthier way of eating and thinking about food. I got really lucky and was offered an opportunity to do this just by chance, and I grabbed it. I'm learning a lot about myself in the process, and I can feel myself changing. It's adding yet another layer to my personality, or my personality awakening that I've been experiencing throughout my life. But of course, it's still in progress as well. And it's not a straight line. That actually takes me into the other side of the personality awakening step, which is that sort of sub step of letting go. You see, part of the cleansing process that occurs while you're in the phase of personality awakening is that you begin to realize what's working for you and what isn't working for you. You start to shed some of the toxins in your life because you realize that those toxins are holding you back. But think of it like this, you can do a 30-day detox cleanse, like the kind of thing that you might read about in a Healthy Living magazine, or the Miracle 7-Day cleanse, or the antitoxin diet for a short time and get some cleansing done. Or you might even go on to a miracle diet pill, something like the current Ozempic fad that's taken over pretty much everyone who can afford it. But after the 7 days or the 30 days, or when you run out of diet pills or stop taking them, for a while, even if your body has experienced that real boost and positivity from the elimination of toxins or result that you've been getting and wanted to get, you may have lost a ton of weight and you look and you feel terrific. You may have done something similar with a toxic friend or an acquaintance, or, it could be anything toxic or that you want to change in your life. If there's anything that you wanted to change in your life and get rid of, well, because it was making life complicated or more complicated than it had to be, you can cleanse it and get it out of your environment and it's gone. No more toxic friend, no more toxic lifestyle. Okay. But what you haven't done is you haven't considered what might be inside you that attracted that person to your life or that thing to your life that made it toxic in the first place. So next time you meet someone new or you're tempted, the toxic element could still be there to enter into your life. It could be the same toxin, a different person, or a different circumstance. And that's where the next part of the step is important, because it doesn't matter how fabulous that next diet pill is, and it doesn't matter whether it works or not. It doesn't matter how effective the 7-day toxin removal regime is, antitox or whatever they call it diet. It doesn't matter what happens there. If you haven't gotten to the root core of what put you in that toxic situation in the first place, it's destined to come back. That's the reason why 95% of diets fail. And of the 5% who lose the weight, 95% of those people put it back on again, because cleansing isn't the end of the story. Personality awakening has two components. First, you see what you don't like and what's not working for you, and you cleanse yourself of it. But then you have to actually put in the hard work and take care of what's inside you that made those toxic things possible. And you need to let go of those things. It's far more than just cleansing. I used to have a smoothie shop a few years ago, and one day we discovered that a colony of ants had nested in the roof cavity about 2 or 3 shops away from my shop. And the reason why I found out is because my shop was the sweetest of them all, because it was full of beautiful fresh fruit and ice creams and frozen yogurts. And I think we had something like 40 different ingredients that a customer could add to their smoothie or juice, all of them either being fresh produce or sugary syrups or other kinds of confectionery. So even if we scrubbed the shop at the end of the day and mopped it and sanitized it like crazy, after a long day of slicing fresh oranges and pineapples and bananas and scooping 1,000 ice cream cones and yogurt smoothies and things like that, the air inside the shop smelt like heaven. It was so sweet and so tempting for a bunch of ants that couldn't wait until nighttime and the street was quiet to quietly crawl across the roof from the kebab shop 2 doors down, right over the clothing shop that was right next to us, and back inside my teeny weeny little smoothie shop through some kind of a secret hole in the roof into the gloriously sweet little smoothie shop full of sugar. For a while there, every morning when one of my staff or me would arrive to open up the shop, it was a 50-50 chance that we would encounter a line of ants coming down from the ceiling. I must have called the landlord's agent about 10 times about the fact that we were powerless over these ants because they were coming from 2 shops away. It took the landlord ages, but finally they caved and they sent a pest control guy out to treat the kebab shop a few doors down. Thankfully, it worked. Once the core root of the issue had been resolved, we never got ants again. They had finally fixed the root of the problem. And that was the end of the problem. But for as long as we were trying to mask it with things like mopping and sanitizing and having a clean shop, the ants just kept coming back because the root core of the issue had not been resolved. So now we know, as part of a personality awakening, this next element is one in which an individual gets to the root of whatever has been holding them back on the inside. This is not as easy to do as it is to describe in words. It's really hard to look inside yourself and genuinely come to terms with the damage that you've been doing to yourself or the ways that you've been holding yourself back. So, for example, I've got a friend who has never been single. She has always gone from mediocre guy to mediocre guy. And once the brief honeymoon period has ended, she's never happy with any of these guys. She meets them, they date for a while, and then they become really familiar with each other, and she moves in with them, right? She moves in with whatever the latest guy is. They set up house together, they get a dog together, they might even buy a house together. That's happened as well. They've lived together, sometimes 5 years, 10 years. And for most of that time, she isn't actually happy in that relationship. Every time I've seen her with her partner, regardless of who he is, she's always snapping at him about something. And it's like she's putting up with him rather than blossoming, with the happiness of the relationship and what it brings her. From the outside, I can see that she's never been single. Never. She has no idea how to be single. And one day I tried really gently to sort of suggest to her that if she spent some time being single, it might help her to discover herself and realize what she's really looking for in a partner. So that next time she can find someone who complements her needs as a person, not just her need to be in a relationship. But you know what? I did talk to her once, but it fell on deaf ears. She actually left that last guy, but didn't even give herself a week to be single. She ended up moving in with the latest guy within months of the previous relationship ending. And I even think she was dating the new guy within about 48 to 72 hours or something of the previous relationship. It's been a few years now, and she's complaining of exactly the same things with this current guy that she was complaining about with the last guy, because she never let go of the things inside her that made these guys continue to fall into her lap. She just needed to take a break and learn what she wants so that she can go find it. So regardless of whether it's behaviors inside a person that make them eat a lot of fake foods or pick the wrong guys over and over again or fall into the trap of being someone's doormat or putting their own needs last or having an unhealthy obsession with money or shopping or being overly judgmental of others or whatever it might be even be a combination of factors that create an obstacle in their lives. It will always be like that until they take care of the root problem inside them. It's always inside them. With me, well, I've always been a bit naughty when it comes to food, a bit like a kid. I would get a kick from eating ice cream because it was fun. It was a fun food, or pizza, or cake, or donuts, or whatever. But did I actually enjoy that food in the ways that made them a positive force for me? No, but I didn't even know that. I do now. They didn't make my body feel nourished. The pizza bread left me feeling bloated. The sugary stuff was sapping my energy and messing with my skin. And as soon as I started really looking at how I feel and what my body is telling me, the things I'm pretending not to know, well, I realized that actually my natural preferences are completely different to what I've been telling myself all these years. Yes, I fall back onto bad habits every now and then because I'm human, but it's happening less and less, and I'm feeling better and better as a result of it. Plus, I feel other positive things that go far beyond this episode. And maybe in a future episode, I'll talk about that. Let's just say that I'm transforming into a different personality yet again in other subtle ways, or as a result of other subtle circumstances. This is a vital aspect of the personality awakening process. Dealing with things, really dealing with them, not with quick fixes, but with permanent changes to who you are and what you do and what you are when you look deep down inside yourself. So, if you've had a mind awakening and you've had a personality awakening in which you've cleansed yourself, but also let go of things inside you that were preventing you from moving forward, what happens next? Well, the next thing doesn't really require very much effort at all. The next step of ascension is one that occurs from within, and it's the stage of experiencing a rebirth because you've made way. It's like the birth of your freedom as a human being, real freedom to be who you were always meant to be, but which was smothered behind the many firewalls, like other people's expectations, lack of confidence, fixation on money or materialism or hypocrisy, or maybe even fear. Things that you might be experiencing when you begin to embark on this stage of your journey of ascension is an awareness of more of the beauty in the world and a reduction in the negative things that you see in other people. You're likely to experience an increase in your sense of compassion towards others, even people that you previously loathed. There's a positive energy that emanates from within you, and your sense of truth and wisdom is peaked. You may crave knowledge, any kind of knowledge, and you may spend your time seeking different perspectives on all kinds of topics. Not because you want to judge those perspectives, but to inhale them so that you can broaden your own perspective and become a sponge that soaks up more and more wisdom and experiences. The physical pleasures, material pursuits, jealousies, and other toxic emotions that you might have felt before appear to have melted away from you. And you look at things differently now. The world seems like a beautifully balanced place with everything representing exactly what it's meant to represent in order to demonstrate the many facets of life and the balance of all things that exist. It is likely that at this point you'll begin to attract like-minded people, and those who previously flocked to you, they might begin to find you a bit peculiar and perhaps even a little bit unnerving. With the freedom of the spirit that you've achieved by this very act of being reborn, you're open to an ascension process occurring. And I guess you could say that at this point, the ascension stage is really just a formality because you've become primed for ascension. And so ascension is inevitable. So think about the people that you've encountered in your life. And that particular person, for example, that left you wondering if they're, well on the path towards achieving a spiritual ascension. Here are some of the things that you might have noticed about that person. Firstly, they're likely to be humble and maybe, polite in their demeanor because they have no need for outlandish, boastful behaviors. They're also likely to come across as patient and understanding when it comes to a range of human issues. And also, they may emanate a kind of happiness or joyfulness. It may just seem to radiate from them in some way. They'll exhibit personal strength and will seem optimistic to you. They may also exhibit compassion, even towards people who are easy to dislike because of their own behaviors. They may demonstrate themselves to be someone who lives with a sense of purpose towards others, or they may be service-oriented, doing things like volunteering their time or offering a lot of their own personal time to support others. And they will have broad insight that is sensible and calming, and it leaves you feeling reassured. They may also appear to be very well balanced in their outlook on life and may be very slow to anger or to get overexcited. They'll be kind to their own body in terms of what they put inside their body, but also how they use and move their body, considering the value that the body brings to their material life and how it needs good nourishment and protection for as long as it's serving the requirements in this world. And they may also have less of an interest in things like materialism as well. The person may practice spiritual rituals like prayer or meditation, and will probably also be someone who never claims to be an expert on a subject, but always seems to be knowledgeable, wise, and sensible about a wide range of things. And it is very likely that this person will have very little that they fear, including any kind of fear of death. The thing about spiritual ascension that is felt by the individual is that it never reaches its destination. It's a process that continues to unfold more and more as the person allows themselves to become more and more open to an ascendant spiritual journey. The longer you feel the spiritual lift of ascension, the closer you feel to a divine collectiveness that exists across all of existence. And the more people who strive for high states of consciousness and who attend to the principles or stages of ascension, the lighter humanity as a collective becomes, which will allow the collective human ascension to occur. And this is when humanity, all of humanity, is handed the ascendant future into an existence that transcends far beyond that of anything material. There really isn't any way of knowing exactly what this means, but what we do know is that the process is already beginning for many of the world's population. This 1 foot in 3D, 1 foot in 4D kind of thing. And it has nothing to do with who you are or where you are in the material sense. It has to do with how far you've progressed through the stages that only you can travel. There are those who will fight the process of ascension. They won't be ready to look outside of their own material trappings. For some people, it will be fear that gets in the way or incomprehension. For others, it might be out of their control, a circumstance of their birth. But for many, the process is very much within their control. All it takes is a shift in mindset, a process of awakening the mind, and then the personality, and then the spirit. The more people who embark on the journey, the more that the scales tip towards the collective ascension of all of humanity. I mean, stop and think. Can you feel it happening? Despite all of the noise around us and the distractions of life, the harsh realities of this material world? Because I do. I can actually feel it, that it is happening. And I look forward to discovering what the realities of existence are like on the other side of this journey. And so, to sum this episode up and everything that I've said, I think ascension involves a transformation in awareness, moving from the self-centric perspective to a more unified, spiritually attuned state of being. The journey from 3-dimensional to 5-dimensional existence is seen to be an evolutionary leap in human consciousness. While 3D focuses on physical and material aspects, 5D emphasizes higher vibrations, universal love, and spiritual connection. But it's really important to remember one thing, and that is that 5-dimensional existence is not a separate thing from the 3-dimensional realities that we currently live in today. In fact, I guess you could kind of call it an overlay that integrates into our daily existence. So think of it this way, okay? It's like you've been walking past a blank wall every day for years. You're hurrying off to your destination, and the only thing you know about this wall is that it's a big blank wall. And then one day, unexpectedly, you suddenly realize that the wall isn't blank at all. It has a sign hanging up saying welcome, and the sign is sitting above a doorway that you never noticed before because you were too busy getting to wherever you thought you were going. That's what transition from 3D to 5D is like. My name is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams Down Under on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who is listening on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to become a member of the KGRA digital community of like-minded spiritualists, experiencers, and weirdos like me, then go to live.kgradb.com and enter promo code Ellie to get 30% off your subscription. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.